What better way to get the blood pumping than through a story that pushes you to the edge of your seat, only to pull you back to safety, then yank the chair out from under you? The word horror, according to the New York Film Academy, was first used to describe the film genre in the 1930s, with the silent era past and films like The Mummy, Dracula, and Frankenstein catching the attention of moviegoers. With attention came controversy. The previously unbounded genre was met with public outcry as it became more and more popular and disturbed audiences. The 1932 film Freaks was banned in the United Kingdom for 30 years, and, according to Lee Pfeiffer writing for Britannica, was called ghastly and repellent by film critics. In the 40s and 50s, fear of nuclear fallout and uncertainty about the future of nuclear weapons sparked a change in the horror genre, with films like Godzilla about radioactive mutation and films with themes of war like The War of the Worlds. Though Victorian literature had often been used as source material for horror films, in the 70s and 80s, Stephen King became horror's greatest reference, with Carrie, The Shining, and Poltergeist all coming out in a span of 6 years. The 80s saw the rise of slashers, producing quite a few cult classics. In the present day, directors like Jordan Peele, Bong Joon-ho, and Anna Lilia Mirpour have been making horror movies that combine horror with socio-political commentary. Throughout horror's history, one thing has remained consistent: the importance of mise-en-scène in telling a story. In order to make a film truly terrifying, to keep an audience alert, to instill discomfort, mise-en-scène is used to make a scene appear realistic. This is not to say that the film must actually take place in the real world. Supernatural worlds and elements have always had an important place in the horror genre, but it is mise-en-scène that makes these worlds believable and therefore scarier. Beyond setting, mise-en-scène is used symbolically and to advance the story and reveal subtext. For example, in Jordan Peele's 2019 film Us, rabbits are used to symbolize duality, a theme that is present throughout the movie. Jordan Peele told The Guardian that rabbits are, quote, adorable, but they terrify me at the same time. The color red is used throughout the movie to link the tethered to the outside world, and further used to reveal subtext when a young Adelaide drops a bright red candy apple at the start of a storm. The apple, representative of the tethered, is left abandoned in the rain, just as they are abandoned test subjects and fated to a life underground. But how does the use of mise-en-scène as a storytelling tool vary across horror subgenres, and how do two very different horror films compare to each other in their use of mise-en-scène? In this video essay, I will dive into the use of setting, character interaction with space, and motifs in Bong Joon-ho's 2019 film Parasite and in Hiroshi Teshigahara's 1966 film The Face of Another. Hiroshi Teshigahara's film The Face of Another follows a man whose face has been severely burned in a workplace accident. To cover his burns, he wears a lifelike mask, but it soon begins to warp his personality. The movie is based on the novel of the same name, written by Kobo Abe. Kobo Abe was a Japanese writer, playwright, and director whose works were surreal and character-focused. He often explored themes of isolation and morality. Parasite is a 2019 film directed by Bong Joon-ho. It centers on the relationship between a high-standing, wealthy family and an impoverished family who slowly insinuate into their household staff. Interwoven with complicated lies and deception are themes of class conflict and, similarly to The Face of Another, questions of morality. The first aspect of mise-en-scène that I will look into is setting. Setting is what defines a scene. One scene equals one setting. This means that a scene takes place in one place at one time. In horror, setting can be used to invoke terror, as well as symbolically and, of course, as a means for storytelling. Whether it means telling a story chronologically, or messing with time and place to further disturb an audience. To start, we'll look at the use of setting in The Face of Another. The movie opens on what we can assume are bustling city streets somewhere in Japan, but as the emphasis remains on the crowd and the actual streets are unseen, it feels as if we are drowning in a sea of faces bobbing up and down, blocking all possible routes of escape. While it would be consistent with the themes of isolation to have our main character be a part of this crowd, standing out in his bandages, swaying against the tide, Teshigahara makes his introduction more personal. The first time we really see our main character, he is at home. While we might assume greater privacy, he seems to be more exposed than if he had been stuck in that crowd of faces. This is because he shares his home with his wife. Before we are allowed to see our main character, Mr. Okuyama, we are presented with the end of a makeup brush brandished by his wife. Okuyama is offended by this, as he feels it is an insult to him in his current state of facelessness. He is put on guard, and, rather than being stuck, he is sent adrift. Parasite introduces its character's conflict in a similar way, a window at ground level. We sink below it, where we are introduced to our first character, Kiwoo, the son of the Kim family. Here, the setting is used to establish the social standing of our protagonists. Not only does the state of the house reveal their state of poverty, but beyond that, there is an implication that the family is beneath wealthier families due to their poverty. This symbolic use of setting is commonplace in the movie. We are introduced to the wealthy Park family as a family who lives in a house atop a hill. The movie focuses on the dynamic between the Park family and the Kim family, until it is revealed that there is a man hiding in the basement of the Park mansion. Gunsei is the lowest of the low. There is a metaphor about a mountain. Those at the top of the mountain live with their heads in the ether, while everyone below gazes upwards towards them, living in blissful ignorance. Only those at the base of the mountain can see the whole picture. At this point in the movie, the Kim family has infiltrated the Park family's household staff by telling lies and sabotaging the previous staff members, getting them fired, and then conveniently appearing next in line for hire. Themes of deception are apparent in both films. In the face of another, Okuyama's lifelike mask acts as a catalyst for his carefree deception. He rents an apartment as his bandaged self, and then returns with the mask to rent it again as someone else. Our protagonist's lies make them flawed, but the movie's deception of the audience is what unsettles us. We are initially introduced to the Parks as generous and loving people, but upon entrance into their house, something feels wrong. It is cold and gray, contrasting with their kind demeanor. It is an abode for them to slip off their masks. The face of another deceives us in a similar way. Though the idea presented to us is that the mask is responsible for Okuyama's personality change, we are never made clear on which version of him is authentic. Is the mask really changing him, or does it give him the freedom to act as he truly pleases? We see Okuyama at home, where he is forced to live as his bandaged self. We see him in restaurants and bars, where he can deceive the strangers around him with his mask. And then we see him in his doctor's office. Here he is in a state of limbo. This state of limbo is represented not only by the blank, otherworldly setting, but also by the use of space in the frame while Okuyama is at his doctor's office. The first appointment that Okuyama has with his doctor is the only one in which the space seems remotely real. From then on, it becomes a dreamland for Okuyama. He is presented with a vision of himself not yet fully formed, and he floats between props and set pieces as if allowing himself to be molded into a new man. He is warped into the shape of a vial, undergoing transformation, and being put to use as a test subject. He is set apart from fellow man. Space is used in Parasite to illustrate the warping of power dynamics between characters. Here we know that Mrs. Park holds power over Kiwoo, but Kiwoo stands ominously over her in the frame as she lays slumped over on the table, foreshadowing his eventual use of wit to gain a leg up on her. The duel between the Park family and the Kim family is one of ignorance versus calculation. In this scene where Ki-jung, another member of the Kim family, reveals she knows of a traumatic event that occurred in the Park son's life, this shift in space is used to visibly represent the immediate shift in power. Here, Da-sung, the son of the Park family, is seen leaning next to a window pane, his reflection seemingly looking into the camera. Da-sung is representative of chaos and unpredictability. The Kim family doesn't register him as a threat due to his young age, which will eventually lead to their downfall. This scene foreshadows his eventual passive ruining of the Kim family's plans, as it all comes to a chaotic halt at a surprise party for Da-sung. Here, the Kim family discovers that the old housekeeper, Moon-gwang, has been hiding her husband in the bunker of the Park house. When they threaten to call the cops, she takes a video of them exposing their con, and threatens to send it to Mrs. Park. She threatens them with the video, pushing them backwards in the bunker. Then we cut to this shot. Now we see them all underground, in a battle where the only prize is life right where they are. This shot is here to remind us that they are all scrambling up the mountain from the same place, and while the rich are able to live in blissful ignorance, the poor must fight each other just to grab hold of the minimal resources that are available to them. While space is used in Parasite to represent the changing character dynamics, it is often used in the face of another to create a visual representation of a space inside Okuyama's mind. When he's first presented with his mask, the space is crowded, taken up by splatters, nails, hands on a glass wall. The bolts in the wall seem to go through him, displaying him as some sort of Frankenstein-like creature. Okuyama often appears in the same place 2 different times. The first time he rents an apartment, he's in his bandages. He sinks below the landlord, ashamed, despite the fact that the landlord is the one who should be more embarrassed in the situation, seeing as he is stepping out from a rendezvous with a lady guest. The second time he rents an apartment, though, this time in his mask, he stands tall in the frame and close to the landlord. While he adjusts to his mask, the space around him is often vast and empty. This is representative of his struggle with identity. He is still unsure of who he is to the total strangers around him. The only person who is fully enlightened is his doctor, who knows both versions of Okuyama. Lastly, I will discuss the use of visual motifs in both movies as messengers of theme and symbolic meaning. The Face of Another is a film that has a lot to say about identity. Reflections are often used to portray the main character's gradual dive into identity crisis. The first reflection we see is in his doctor's office. It is faint, almost invisible. We are left to wonder where it is coming from, as there appears to be no glass or mirrors in the shot. The doctor's office later becomes a maze of mirrors. We don't see Okuyama's reflection because he is a blank slate, someone with no identity to reflect upon. Rather, he is literally the man in the mirror, mysterious and sculptable. Finally, Okuyama forgets himself and is reminded by his reflection that, while seducing his wife as his masked self, he's a different man with the same woman. This makes his wife appear as someone else to him and brings his crisis to its summit. Could they really be two different people, one unmarried, one adulterous? With Okuyama's identity change came the identity change of those around him. It begs the question, is identity really something that can be altered by self-modification, or is it in the hands of those who surround us? One thing is certain, Okuyama does not have a vision of his own identity. It is defined only by how others see him. Parasite uses motifs in similar progression. A reappearing prop in Parasite is the Scholar's Rock, a rock that was gifted to Kiwoo with the intention of bringing luck and prosperity. When he is forced to quickly evacuate his house, he takes it with him, but ultimately it is just a rock, and it is used as that against him. The journey of the Scholar's Stone in Kiwoo's life parallels that of the Kim family and the Park family's life. They can dress up and appear as miracle after miracle to the Park family, but in the end, they wind up crushing the heart of the Park family. In the same way that Kiwoo had real faith in what was just a rock, the Park family formed real trust in what turned out to be a con. Lights are often used in Parasite to represent the level of awareness that the characters have. Lights are often an opportunity at awareness that the characters who can afford to ignore. Like when Gunsei flashes Morse code from the basement and the Parks dismiss it as wires on the fritz. They are blissfully ignorant and they are missing out. Here comes the epic meeting point of these motifs. The rock, deception, the lights, knowledge. The Face of Another also combines its motifs in a clever way. Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, along with other quote-unquote ideals of physical form, often obscure a view of the characters, whether plastered onto mirrors or on the backs of clear shelves. At the same time, Okuyama's view of us, the audience, is obstructed. Tashigahara's thesis seems to be that personal identity is dictated by other people, but with Okuyama's obsession with image in the way, his identity becomes unclear rather than perfected. Tashigahara's combination of these motifs is arguably more subtle, a glance in the mirror. Okuyama finally peers into the mirror and sees the perfect man he's been trying to become. But in regards to his identity, he has become a monster. He realizes it, his wife realizes it, and we realize it. Hiroshi Tashigahara uses mise-en-scène in The Face of Another primarily to build a space inside of his character's warping mind, while Bong Joon-ho uses it in The Parasite to display changing character dynamics. While both directors were challenged with communicating similar themes of identity, morality, and relationships, they used mise-en-scène quite differently to tackle similar goals. Setting in The Face of Another changes in strange ways as the story progresses. This pushes the audience deeper and deeper into the mind of the character. While we start as simple observers, we leave the movie carrying a part of Okuyama with us. This part is not full, but rather the hollow part of his identity, dictated by those around him. Tashigahara's mise-en-scène being used to portray the inner world of a character means that his settings often appear incomplete or uncanny, somewhere in between reality and a dream. Bong Joon-ho, on the other hand, keeps his abstract use of mise-en-scène quite subtle, using props and settings that are only somewhat strange but believable as parts of the real world. His mise-en-scène places a large amount of emphasis on the characters' social standings in relation to each other. So while both films focus on character identity in relation to others, Hiroshi Tashigahara does this from inside of his character's mind, while Bong Joon-ho does it from an aerial view, looking out at everyone at once.